Hello and welcome to the webinar on Tracking Your Produce for Your Business and Health by Colleen Collier-Bess. My name is Alice Formiga and I'm the webinar coordinator for eOrganic. eOrganic is the organic agriculture community of practice with extension.org. We're a community of cooperative extension service personnel, researchers, ag professionals, organic certifiers, and practitioners. You can find all our published articles and videos on organic farming on our website at extension.org/organic_production. We've been running a series of webinars with North Central SARE, and you can find our upcoming and recorded webinars at the same link. I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Colleen Collier-Bess. Colleen recently retired from the Michigan Department of Agriculture Pesticide and Plant Pest Management Division. She provided guidance for the Organic Cost Share Program for several years, and then as USDA Good Agricultural Practices became a reality, she was one of 2 USDA GAP inspectors conducting audits for the state of Michigan. Her knowledge has helped many farmers reduce risks on their farms by implementing good agricultural practices and successfully passing subsequent audits. Also online today with us is Vicki Marone of the Michigan State University CS Mott Group, who has co-organized this webinar series. She'll be moderating our question and answer session. Colleen will be speaking for 45 minutes and then we'll have a 30-minute question and answer period.
Okay, today we are going to be talking about tracking your produce for farm and business. I want to take this moment to thank Alice for her technical support, her training for this person who's not real good on this webinar, and all your help. You have been absolutely amazing, and I just want to say thank you. And I'd also like to thank Vicki for this opportunity to talk, and I am absolutely humbled to be asked to speak to the organic farmers and whoever else happens to be on the line. This is a good opportunity to talk about an area that is very important, which is traced back to the farm. We are going to take just a few minutes and we are going to do a poll. We're actually going to do 3 polls during this talk. And each one of those polls, if you would just take a second and answer the poll, that would really be appreciated and will help the educators that are on the line. So if we can get started and bring the first poll up. Okay, here it is. Here's the poll. Are you a farmer? Yes or no? Okay, that looks pretty good. I don't know what you guys can see. I think you probably can see the same thing I can, but 42% of the people on the line today are farmers. That's awesome, and 58% are not. So that's good to know that we have farmers out there that are interested, and I want to specifically thank those farmers for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and hopefully you will find it of value. Anyway, tracking your produce for farm and business. We're going to do a quick overview of GAP. What does GAP stand for? I bet you every single one of you could spell it frontwards and backwards and tell me what it stands for. It is an acronym for Good Agricultural Practices. And I will refer to it as GAP during the first part of this presentation, and I may mention it a few other times, but that's what I'm talking about. I'm going to try really hard on section 1 not to get stuck in the weeds. So hopefully I can do that successfully because I tend to like to give more detail than is necessary, so I'm going to try real hard not to do that. Our main focus today is going to be on traceability, and that's really what Vicki had asked me to talk about, is to talk about traceability. And in that traceability, we're going to talk about labeling, and we're also going to talk about labeling or marking your product that's leaving the farm. And we're going to talk about a mock recall. And sometimes farmers find that a little bit challenging, but it really is a very simple process, and you will find that it will test your system. So I think that that would be good. Your takeaway message today, if you leave with nothing else, farmers on the line, is to, if you don't have a traceability system on your farm, to take a moment and just start thinking about it. You have a winter ahead of you. I'm not sure on the West Coast if there's any West Coast farmers on here, where you may be still doing some growing. But in Michigan, it's starting to get a little cold, and so it'll be a while before the farmers are actually out in the fields digging and doing the things that they do to bring good food to our table. So anyway, there are plenty of resources that will be at the end of this presentation, and we will talk about that as we move through the process. Well, we went too fast. Okay. Good agricultural practices. Once again, we're talking about GAP. Now, how do you quickly define what it really means in the terms? Good agricultural practices is an audit certification, and it focuses on good agricultural practices that a farmer is using on their farm to grow, harvest, pack, and store fruits and vegetables. It also includes the transportation of that products to the market wherever that happens to be, and the things that you have put in place on your farm to reduce the risk of microbial food safety hazards. It is very, very important that you know that you do not need to be a scientist, although we do need those scientists. You just need to have a good common sense approach when you're looking at your farm. What can you do to reduce the risk? Do you see an area on your farm that could potentially be a risk? And what kind of things could you do? And if you happen to get stuck and you're uncertain what you need to do in order to be able to successfully pass an audit or anything else on your farm, talk to your local extension, or like Vicki there will be a slide at the end which will have her name and her email address. There are plenty of people out there that are more than willing to help you work through the process. Okay, good agricultural practices. This is a type of audit, and it's being conducted throughout the United States and other countries. It may not be called the same name, but it pretty much means the same thing. There may be some added values to different types of audits. And what an auditor does is they come out and they verify your farm practices, and they're just making sure that the practices or SOPs that you have put in your farm manual, you're actually doing those on your farm to reduce the chance of microbial contamination of produce. An audit is just a snapshot of time. It's the auditor's there, and this is what happened while the auditor was there. It doesn't mean that every single day you are doing exactly everything correct, because we all know that we have people that work for us, and people do make mistakes. And as an auditor, I have seen those mistakes happen so many times when I've been out on an audit, and you know that they have practices in place, but sometimes people don't follow what we need them to do. So we need to make sure that they're trained proper. Some type of certification agencies will do announced and unannounced audits to verify that you are following the standard operational procedures or SOPs that you have set forth in your farm. So, you know, some do, some don't. USDA does, but not every single audit would receive an unannounced. Okay, what's important? On a GAP audit and on having this implemented on your farm, you need to know your farm plan. And those of you out there who are organic farmers who are certified already have a farm plan, so you definitely are way ahead of farmers that are doing conventional and have had to start creating farm plans. You guys already have them in place. So that gives you kind of a head start and maybe almost to the goal line. But you need to also know what the requirements are of the audit that you're seeking. That's very, very important to make sure that that is a part of your farm plan. You need to make sure that in that farm plan you include who is in charge. Sometimes farmers, because they have to do so many things, they might be the mechanic on the farm, and they might be the person that's selling the produce, and they've just got so many hats that sometimes it really is a challenge for them to be in charge of GAP on the farm. So that may be something that they would want to delegate to someone else on the farm that they had confidence would be able to carry it out in exactly the way that they want to do that. And the bottom line there, I say document, 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 but that doesn't mean cut down 1,000 trees in order to document. It means that figure out a system that's simple enough that you can restrict it to a few pieces of paper and just track on maybe a chart or something like that. And we will get to that later on in this presentation. Okay, what do you need to do? Let's say you've today decided, you know, I am going to get GAP certified, and this is what I think I need to do in order to move my farm just a little more forward. You're going to need to contact the GAP certification agencies, and there'll be a few things that I think that you need to do. When you contact those GAP certification agencies, find out what the price is. Prices are all over the board, and so number one, you want to find out that. And this is if you're voluntarily going to become GAP certified. Now, there's another piece of the puzzle, which is the next line there. If a buyer asks you to have a GAP audit in order to sell to them, then it becomes a condition of sale. Then you're going to need to know what audit they want you to do, because a lot of times they will have a specific audit that they would recommend that you do or want you to do. If you have multiple buyers and they want you to do multiple audits, push back, talk to them, say, hey, I want a farm. I can't spend all my time and resources doing audits. And try to get it down that each buyer would reasonably accept just one type of audit, and that way you would only need to go through the process once. Just, you know, make sure that you do your checking, and especially on those prices, because I have heard all different types of prices, and bottom line is you need to stay farming because we want to be able to buy good food. Various certification agencies, they are all similar, but they are all different too. There's some things that are a thread that's continuous throughout the audits that everybody has, and then there are other things that are just a little bit different. So you need to check with those too and see if those meet what you are doing currently on your farm. You also need to make sure that you know exactly what they're going to require of you and what you should expect. On a USDA audit, because it's what I have done in the past, when an auditor shows up on your farm, you can expect that you're going to spend a good portion of your time going through paperwork, and then they're actually going to go out to where you're harvesting. They're going to walk through the fields with you. They're going to look at your farm operation, the entire farm operation, plus you know, go out there where you're harvesting and take a look at the harvest process, the transportation process, and whatever else is going on. And I would make the assumption that most audits are similar to that. Okay, now as an organic farmer, you have a little something else that you really need to be concerned about, and that is if you are organically certified, you already have an organic farm plan. So when you decide to go with a certification agency, take a look at your organic farm plan and how much of it already meets the requirements of the GAP audit you are requesting. Maybe there's only minimal things that you need to add or modify. So take a moment and think about that, and think about what you need to do to make those changes, but don't make those changes. Your first thing you should do is be contacting your organic certification agency and talking to them about the changes that you are thinking about making, because you want to make sure that in no way that you jeopardize your organic certification by changing a farm plan. So, you know, and right offhand, I really can't give you an example, but I can tell you that that would be my first call, and I think that should be your first call too. Don't take a risk of affecting that because you've worked hard to accomplish that. Okay, GAP and traceability. Okay. Good agricultural practices and organic certification includes traceability. So if you have organic certification on your farm, you already have some type of traceability on your farm that you have put in place. or are in the process of putting something in place. So know that these all go hand in hand and are a very important part of today's agriculture, where I think recently, what was it melons recently, that there have been, several recalls. We had a tomato recall a few years back that pretty much shut down the tomato industry for, quite a period of time. And we all know that how perishable tomatoes can be, and they can't afford to sit on shelves and not be moved. So these kind of things are really important to be able to trace back and be able to protect your farm. And once again, we are going to do a poll. Why do you want to know about traceability? Select one of the following: organic certification, food safety certification, audit gap, both, just learning and gathering information. If you could take a moment to answer that poll so that we can get those totals on the screen. Just learning and gathering, that's great. And okay, so we have 36% just learning and gathering information. We have organic certification, 8%. We have food safety certification, audit gap, 21. Wow, 21%, that's awesome. And combined 36%, good for each of you, and thank you so much for taking the time to do that. I love it. Okay, I was worried. Traceability. Oh, back up one. I need to have more patience when operating this. Okay, if you look at those pictures there, we're looking at, the one on the right is, asparagus, and it was a picture that was provided to me by Vicki, and I squeezed it in. But the other one there is some yellow logs, and those of you that, if you look real close, you can see that that is asparagus. And the name on the carton is, or they've written on there is Pablo. When we finish this presentation, I'm going to bring that screen up again. And my expectations are that each one of you will know if that's enough in order to meet traceability on your farm. And you most likely already know the answer. What is traceability? Traceability in produce means the ability to trace back using electronic or handwritten documentation throughout the production chain. Wow. That sounds like a tough thing to do. Basically what it is it's a thread that is weaved through the entire process. And you as a farmer are just a very small piece of that thread, but you're the important piece because you are the beginning. Product can be contaminated anywhere along the line. So even though we're focusing on farmers today, it could be contaminated at the wholesale place. It could be contaminated at the grocery store. It could actually be contaminated in our own kitchen. So it's not just the farmer, but we're trying to put tools in place to help protect the farmers. What is traceability? For a farmer, it means the ability to trace back to the farm, field, block, crew, date harvested, date shipped, receiver, etc., using his or her records. Well, we know that it's going to require records. So that means let's figure out a way to simply do those, whether it's a handwritten or whether it's electronic. And as I told you before, later on we will be pulling those up. It's going to be one step back and one step forward is all you're required to do as a farmer. So if you can trace it back to the field it came from, and you can contact the person that received your product, you are meeting the requirements of traceability. I had a farmer that did an awesome job. He a very, very nice farmer, and did an awesome job on his farm. successfully, did everything along the way. I was out to do his audit, and we got almost done with his audit, and this was before Traceback is now intertwined into the USDA audit, but at that time it was a separate component. And I asked him the question if he had done a mock recall, and he looked at me and he said yes. And I said, well, was it successful? And he said, no, it wasn't. And I'm like, I was pretty much flabbergasted, because the man had done everything. I mean, the farm was probably an extremely nice, huge farm anyway, but he just shook his head, and you could tell he was terribly frustrated by the whole situation. And so as we talked, I found out that, he had put everything into place. He made sure everything was documented. He had logs in place, and he did a lot of paper logs, and they were perfect. And he had shipped product to the person that was going to be processing his product. And they had actually, when he called to do the mock recall, they couldn't find his product. So it's important, and we will talk about mock recall, that you test that system before it becomes an emergency and you need to test the system. Mock recall can tend to be a little bit of a pain, but once you've done it once, then it's really no big deal. You just follow it each year. Most audits may or may not require you to do that. I know USDA requires mock recall in order to get the points for that question, but I'm not sure about others. But I think as a farmer, it's probably definitely a tool you would want to use, whether you were GAP certified or not. Just check in your system to see if it's working, because you're spending a lot of time and dollars on getting the system ready on your farm, and you want to make sure that things are right. Well, okay. Okay, here is another, I'm assuming this is asparagus. Anyways, you look at those yellow logs, you see like the red paint on them. Do you see any tags, labels? There could have very well been some shipping documents. I'm not sure whether this is incoming or outgoing, whether this came from the field. I mean, you really can't tell a lot from this, but I don't see any markings on there, so I know that this is not probably going to be leaving the field until something has been added to it. Okay, traceability. The number one thing you need to remember on your farm is your farm's unique. Yeah, it's similar to maybe your neighbors or somebody else that does asparagus or corn or cherries or whatever the product is. But the things that affect your farm are very unique. And so nobody knows the farm like you do as a farmer. So in order to put a traceability system in place, you definitely need to know your farm and your processes. So think about that. That's going to be your winter project to think about. And then, do you want to keep it simple, or do you want it to be complex? You can do either way. I'm going to focus on simple, because I find that the simpler that a person makes something, they can always add things to it, but the simpler it would mean that they would be more apt to be able to continually be able to do it, and it not be a problem every day to have to fill out this or fill out this or go get this. So just, think about it in how could I do it on my farm to accomplish traceability on the farm and keep it simple. Okay, it can be electronic, which, you could use, there's a lot of really nifty things out there. You could use barcodes, absolutely. And the little guns that they use, like you see at the grocery stores, you could do that. Or you could do handwritten documents and logs. Very simple. You can put those in a binder or on a clipboard and keep it simple and still meet the things that you need to do in order to be traceable. You may or may not be GAP certified. In order to be traceable on the farm does not mean that you have to be GAP certified. It just means you want to be able to, if FDA comes knocking at your door and says your product is in a recall, and I'm not sure exactly how they do it because they've not knocked on my door, but if they do knock on your door, you want to be able to pull some records and show them that, you know what was harvested on those specific dates, and you know exactly where that product went, and you even know who was harvesting that day on your farm. There's, you know, it's really, it actually will give you some comfort to know that you know all the information about your farm. And so once again, I'm going to say implement traceability on your farm. Don't put it off until you get that knock on the door. Do it now, and get the resources out there, extension, scientists. You've got colleges out there, you've got state agencies, you've got government agencies. Everybody wants to help. Some are free and some are not, but you know, there are a lot of free resources out there that you can go to in order to help you get this accomplished. Or you can pay somebody. Okay, let's see if we can move it. Okay, basics of traceability. What's the bottom line? What do you have to do in order to have traceability on your farm? You need to give the blocks, fields, or farms a unique ID. Something special about that farm that will allow you to be able to trace back. You need to track the dates of harvest, because if you harvested cucumbers for 14 days, do you want all 14 days of your cucumbers to be tied up in a recall, or would you like to be able to go right back to the day and the code that's involved? So harvest date's important. So if you add your harvest date plus your farm, field, or block, you're going to come up with an ID number, okay? And it's going to be unique to you, so that's important. You also need to track the dates you ship and to whom. So either a log, something that you're going to be tracking everything that goes out. Maybe you keep copies of a shipping document. Whatever you do, make sure that you know when it was shipped, because that could be a very critical element. Keep records that include all the above, should there be a food safety outbreak. Now, you know, it wouldn't have to be food safety. It could also be that something actually happened on your farm. A hose broke and oil spread all over the product and contaminated, or you found out that a neighbor pesticide had drifted over onto your product that you had harvested, and which would cause more concerns, but we're not going to go into those right now if you're an organic farmer. So anyway, it could be something, and you want to be able to track back as close to you can as what exactly was involved. Also, be organized. That is probably the key element to any of these traceability systems, is to be organized. Know your system and be organized. Always include an invoice, delivery form, whatever you use, with each shipment that is leaving the farm. And I know that there are farmers out there that don't include anything. So we've learned that doing gap audits, that sometimes they deliver and then the receiver sends you back something. You need to really control that yourself. You need to know what exactly left your farm and have really good records, and relying on somebody else to send you back something might not be to your advantage. But anyway, on that invoice, once again, you're going to need to have, or delivery form, or whatever you want to call it, shipping document. You're going to need to have farm, who you are. That needs to be on there. The date that you're shipping it, not just the farm and hand the piece of paper. You need to put the date of shipment on there. Somehow it needs to have the harvest date. If it's always the same as the shipping date, then that is not of concern. But if it's not, then you need to know the different dates, just in case it's something that could have happened during harvest that contaminated a product, and what it was. If you only have apples, you know, then it's probably not as significant or important. But if you had multiple crops, then it would be important that that crop was also on there. And the number of containers that you have shipped out. How many? Was it 100, 200, 300, whatever it was, if it was 20. Okay, so you also need to have the block, field, farm ID. So if you shipped those, you could include that code on there, and that would take care of a portion of that if you had developed your code. Okay, the following templates were created by Vicki Marone, Outreach Specialist for Organic Production, and Mark Coe, Farm Manager. They are both at MSU, to help simplify the traceability process for the farmer. Now these are an example. We're not saying that this is the end-all be-all. We're just saying that this is an item that you can choose to use or that you can adapt to your particular operation. Because some of these there may be categories on here that would not be things that are necessarily things that happen on your farm, but there are some really important components on here that have been included. So let's get started on those. Okay, the first one here, this is a daily receiving log. And if you notice up at the top, there's the date. And over here is the crop. And then you'll notice there's like a crew captain, time received, lug ID, pallet ID, gross weight, whether it was placed in the cooler, and did anybody take a look at it. Okay. This is just an idea of what you could use on the farm, and maybe some of these categories, like maybe you don't weigh the cartons. I think of blueberries. I was actually out performing a blueberry gap audit last year, and that was one of the things that kind of amazed me, is that they weighed every single bucket of blueberries that came up before it was put into a lug, that every one of them was weighed and logged. So that's the first form. And also, if you see that maybe you have an idea about something about this log that maybe could be different and would help Vicki in her projects that she's working with the organic farmers, please feel free to contact her, and her information will be at the on one of the reference slides. Okay, here's a shipping log, and I really like the shipping log. It can be as simple or as complex as you want, but I like the fact that instead of having multiple pieces of paper flying around, you could actually stick all those pieces of paper in a folder and just have one log that was on a clipboard or in a binder that you could refer to if you needed to. This is a great way to track what has happened on your farm for the season, and you know, it's got a start date, the field, the crop, the lugs, the lot, the weight, the date, lugs and pallets, weight and lug, customer, and invoice. So, I mean, it's got a lot of great information there that you could capture and have in one location. This could either be something that was on a piece of paper in a clipboard, or you actually could have it on your computer if that was your preference. And the last and final one is actually a really good one, because you look at it and it's a picker log. Well, you know how seasons come and go, and the farmer has done so many things at the end of the season that it's really hard for them at times to know exactly who is out there in their field if they are a big farm. So this one here kind of takes that responsibility, and I would assume the crew leader is the one that's probably filling this out. But it could be anybody. But you take a look at the top of it, and some good things about it is, of course, it has the date, which is a critical piece. And then it actually has each one of the dates, so you are the days of the week. So you could circle those days of the week. It could have the start time and the stop time. It's got a crew leader. And then it's got the field, so it's basically the field that they were working in, whatever name or code that you have given that field, and what crop it was, because maybe you're harvesting multiple crops like different vegetables, and so you could specifically have that. It also has all the crew names down here, which is great, because let's say one of those crew members that was harvesting the product came down with hepatitis. or something else, and you needed to know what crew they were on and what could be impacted, and what had happened and all that, you could just pull this form and you would be able to see who was out there that day. And then it just has a bunch more information on the bottom, like company picked, lug ID, pallet ID, time harvested, gross weight, net weight. Now, these are just suggested categories, but it kind of shows you how you can take multiple pieces of information and put it into one log that you could refer to, grab the piece of paper, put it in a folder, and you would be able to follow along. Okay, here's some lugs, and I don't know whether they're coming or going, and I don't necessarily see any tags on those. Once again, I see the red spots on them, and I know those are asparagus because I can see how they're laying in there. So if they're coming in, then there should be something coming in with them that says what part of the field, if there are multiple fields being harvested. And if they're going out, are they tagged? Is at least the pallet tagged with the general information that could track it back to field, farm, date of harvest, and if you had multiple crews, crew? And did you do a shipping document that went along with that load to the destination that it was going to? Okay, unique ID for marking containers. Containers should be marked, and this is a minimum. They should be marked with the farm name. And so if you are using cartons that already have your name on them, then you don't have to worry about that. But if you happen to be a small farmer and you are using generic cartons, then you need to be concerned about how am I going to get my farm name on there, what kind of code am I going to use. And you look at the field or the block. What do you have, and how have you ID'd that? The date harvested, and log and invoice will show the ship date. Okay, take a look at these markings again, just a reminder. Pablo, that's probably not enough of markings in order to do a traceback system. Could you add some stuff to it and make it traceable? Yes, you could. And if that was the crew leader and his name was Pablo, and they were the only field out there shipping, that were harvesting that day and bringing product into you to send into a process plant or a packing house, you could possibly by that information know what it was, but most likely you would want more information than that. Okay, we're going to take a quick minute, and what I want you to do is, this is between you and I, so nobody will see this. I'm going to give you some information, and then I want you to quickly come up with an answer. But you're just doing it for yourself. Bill's Farm shipped 22 cartons of zucchini. They harvested on 8/28/11 from the home farm to a buyer. The cartons were generic cartons. You need to include in the code the identity of the farm, the field, and the date harvested. What could the code be? It should probably just take you a few seconds to do that, so I'm not going to delay for a long period of time. I'm going to move on, but I just wanted you to just think about it. Okay, now I took that information and I said BF11 HF 828. And it just meant Bill's Farm, and the 11 standard for the year. The HF standard for the block name, which was Home Farm, and the date was 8/28. I do not, well, I can say that not all farmers would actually want to put that harvest date on there. And I would say that most likely they might use something else. They might use the, say, first day of harvest, second day of harvest, third day of harvest, and might have a calendar that coincided with those codes. or they might use a Julian date, or any other method that would help them to track it back to what that specific date was, and a code that would be unique for their specific farm. And basically all it does is help you should there become trouble down the road. Okay, now we've talked about the coding and stuff. The other information, once again, is your log or your invoice and your shipping document. Those are the things that you would also need in order to have a complete traceability system. Okay, mock recall. Well, what's a mock recall? Well, it's kind of like doing a fire drill. You practice it, you see if it works. If it doesn't work, you go back and you tweak it and you practice again so that you can be successful. So on traceability, it's the same principle. You're going to contact whoever you have sent your product to. You're going to tell them that you're going to do a mock recall. And I most likely would probably make that call in the winter months when it's a little slower and not the peak of season, and tell them that sometime early in your harvest this next season you're going to be conducting a mock recall. It'll only take a minute of their time, and you would really appreciate them being a part of that process. And what it will do is it will test your system. Is the coding system and the shipping documents and the logs that you're using all you need in order to trace that back to a particular block on your farm and a specific date? If it works, great. If it doesn't work, you got plenty of time to modify and re-implement if necessary. That's an important one because you have plenty of time to do it. Keep all communication records in regards to that mock recall. And if you are going to be GAP certified down the road, then another important piece would be to write out an SOP or standard operating procedure, exactly what you're going to do to conduct a recall. And then when you do a mock recall, you refer to that, you follow your steps. Okay, when you are documenting this, you want to also document what you asked them for. If you sent them yellow squash and that's what you're going to recall, then document that you asked them for 22 yellow squash and the code that you had on the cartons, the date you shipped it, and how many cartons are left. If an actual recall, you would ask them to hold, you would ask them to hold for pickup. But if it's not an actual recall, just have them, maybe you can type out or give them something that you can have them sign off on if you're going to do a GAP audit, because you're going to need some support documentation that you actually conducted the audit. In a USDA audit, I believe it's 6 months. Within 6 months of having your audit, you need to have that done. I mean, it's kind of hard for small farmers because you have such a short window in order to get that done. But you can do it, and just don't make it too complicated. Okay, a mock recall for a farmer is successful when you're able to follow a container of produce from harvest to the receiver of your produce using electronic or handwritten records. That's all it is. So if you are capturing good information, you're completing your records like you need to, the traceability system will work and the mock recall will work. We're going to do another poll, and it's only going to take just a few minutes, so if you would bear with me while they bring that poll up. Do you have a traceability system in place? Select one of the following: yes, no, just beginning the process. we got 19% currently have it in place. We have 39% that do not have it in place. And we have 42% that are just beginning the process. Awesome. I think that's great, and it's nice to hear that you're staying ahead of the curve. Okay, now I'm going to do the usual, which, let me move on. Let me click. I'm going to be a pro at this, and then I'll be done. Okay, why do any of this? I know that there's at least one person out there that is thinking this, so I am going to touch on this. One food safety incident can shut down an entire industry. Wow, think about that. Tomatoes, for several weeks, it was shut down. Farmers can't afford for that to happen, so we definitely need to do what we need to do in order to protect our food supply. Traceability is and I put the word requirement in there, but I think it's more, the word should probably be a part of organic certification and gap audits. It's something that you need to take a look at and develop for your farm. It also, if there happened to be a problem, heaven forbid, it shows that you did due diligence on your farm. It also helps you to market your product. You got to remember that this can be a marketing tool too, that you have good agricultural practices, or you have a traceback system in place, and if you sell the product to them and something would happen, you can take it right back to the day it was harvested and even to the crew that did the harvesting of the product. There are some traceback systems that can actually take it back to the actual person that picked the product. I've seen a few of those in the marketplace when I've been conducting market inspections that would show actually the picture of the person on the carton, but those are definitely a little more advanced than a small farmer would want to invest in at this time. It also helps you make decisions on your farm based on the records and not your memory. I read that in a document recently, and that really is true. I don't know how many farmers over the last few years have told me that being a part of GAP and implementing a process on their farm has helped them to know more about their farm than they really, they did a lot based on memory before. I mean, it can tell you everything. If you do a good job at setting up those forms like Vicki showed earlier, that can really help you track what's going on your farm and be able to base decisions based on what happened instead of what you think happened, because as you get older, like I am, you realize that memory is not as good as it could be. And the other thing is, good records and documentation is just good business. Okay, helpful resources. I'm going to quickly go through these. I think I have just barely enough time, so I'm going to quickly go through these. The first one on the list is Vicki's website, and it has her information and her phone number. Like I said, she's the outreach specialist for organic production, and if you need an answer, that woman can find the answer. She works long and hard, and she's dedicated, and I am just in awe of her and the things that she does for the industry. The next one here, I found this one when I was kind of like surfing the web on some things that I thought might be helpful for farmers. And this one here is a 2-day class, and it's on developing your own farm food safety plan. I have not attended this class, but Cornell does some really awesome things, and I think that you would find that beneficial if you haven't started that process and that was something that you needed to do. The third one on this list is Bad Bug Book, and I love the name of it, but it's an FDA book, and I didn't have time to spend a lot of time reading on it, but it just gives you a little background information. I know that a lot of you organic farmers are, really very intelligent individuals, and you probably would enjoy reading this book and learning about the things that are out there that everybody's talking about, and if you don't already know, all this information. I felt that it was worth reading and We'll probably go back to it at some point. I love the title, though. The next thing is, on the top there, that was something that Vicki sent me, and it was from Cornell again, and it's Educational Materials Assessment, and it talks about compost, and I felt that was definitely a resource that a farmer may need. And then the third one there is a NASAC, and it's about the Food Modernization Act. Well worth your time to read that. If you have any problems that going into these links, then I would suggest that you do a cut and paste that into your web browser, because I'm not sure the links on these documents will work. So you may need to do a cut and paste or print the screen and then do it. FDA is the next one, and this book here, I know it forwards and backwards. The USDA gap audit, when we started with those in Michigan in 2003 and 2004. This is the guidance document that was used to develop that program, and so it's got a lot of, it's a quick read, it's just a few pages, but it's definitely worth your time to read that. And the last one on this page is, I mentioned USDA gap audits, and this one is the verification program, and it just tells you how to contact people. It has the USDA checklist and any other information you may need should you decide that that's the audit you want to go through. The checklist is the questions that they ask. And let's see. On here, let's go back one. I tapped too much. Okay. On this one here, MOSA, and what it is, it's Midwest Organic Sustainable Education Service, and it has got a nice article in there on farm lot numbers, and it explains about them, and it has examples of creating lot numbers. So just to kind of give you a little more information on that. And I also seen a little piece on Rodell, and it's also about creating lot numbers. So, you know, if you're still a little not totally comfortable with creating the lot numbers, take a look at those. Mine that I talked about was a very simple process, but there are definitely more things that may need to be added in order to keep yourself as a unique farm. Okay, and then we look here at the GAP certification agencies, and these are not every GAP certification agency that's operating in Michigan or in the United States or world, but I just grabbed a few of them that I am a little tiny bit familiar with. I know who they are, okay? The first one, the USDA GAP, that's the one that I conducted audits on. Then there is Primus Labs, who does a lot of audits in the United States, and AIB, who conducts a lot of audits in Michigan, QMI, and last but not least, NSF. And thank you. That slide's for you, Vicki.
Okay, thank you very much, Colleen. We're going to move on to our question and answer period in a moment, but I just wanted to let people know how they can ask questions. If you have any questions, you can simply type them into the question box and hit return. The question box is on your control panel, and if you don't see it, you can click the little plus sign next to the word question to open it up. I wanted to also let you know that this presentation has been recorded, and we're going to be posting both the slides as a PDF file and a recording of this presentation at the link on your screen. And what we'll also do is post those links that Colleen just mentioned, because I know many of them were long and it's easy to, they change very often, so we'll check those links and then we'll post them on that recording page. You can find our schedule of upcoming webinars and view all of our recorded webinars at the second link on your screen. And if you have additional questions after this question and answer period, you can also use the eExtension Ask an Expert service at the third link. Finally, before we move on, we very much value your feedback, so please fill out our follow-up email survey, which will be arriving in your email box shortly after the webinar. So Vicki, let me turn this over to you for the questions.
Okay, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. So one clarification that somebody sent in to regarding on slide number 34, that Moses is not the same as MOSA. MOSA is an organic certifying agency, and MOSES is the Upper Midwest association that works with education for organic farmers. They're the ones that host probably the largest organic conference in the U.S. every February, but they also provide an incredible number of resources to assist organic farmers in the process of farming organically and certification, as well as offering a hotline. So thank you for that clarification. So one question that was, I think, very important was, how do you label bins or containers or boxes based on the code that you shared with us, Colleen, that if there's more than one shipment that day, or if there's several shipments that day to different vendors, to different buyers?
Okay, I'm trying to get a visual of that question.
So you had, Colleen, you had the date you included the field, and you included the year and the farm name. But we didn't know whether it was zucchini or corn, and we didn't know if that was carton shipment 1 for the day or shipment 7.
Okay, so you may have to add something additional to that card. When you're having multiple shipments going out that day, you may have to add something different, and that's when I talked in that one slide about the uniqueness of your farm. If you're only shipping one load, it's not a big deal. But if you're shipping multiple loads, then you may need to add something in order to be track that particular ship back to your farm.
Thank you, Colleen. So another question was, a farmer, I think she's concerned about suggestions for direct farm to customer sales. What should they do regarding traceability?
If they are selling complete cartons, then I say mark your cartons. But if they are selling, like a lot of times they'll have a beautiful display of multiple types of produce, have your name and address there. The person that's buying from you knows where your farm stand is, and I do not feel that it would be of value or should it be to have an individual tomato marked with who you are. I think that you have the information there, you're identifying yourself, and I'm not sure at this point whether that is going to be a requirement or not. I think right now, I think they're okay.
Thank you. So another very different question is, how does one become a GAP certifier? And can a farmer become a GAP certifier?
Yes, they absolutely could. And what you're going to, if you wanted to, and I am thinking they want to be an auditor and not a certification agency, so should I answer it that way?
It was the auditor, okay. Kind of like an organic inspector.
Right. I'm going to say that that's probably what they want to be, is they want to do certification. Seek out the company that you're looking for. I recently saw something where one of the auditing firms, and I believe it may have been Primus, but I'm not 100% certain, was hiring. Contact them. You know, go to their websites, that list of certifying websites. There, you can go and pull those up, and there may be many more, and just contact them and tell them of your interest, and then go out there and, you know, learn what you can. And I'm sure that there would be some classes that you would need to take, like for USDA, I believe it's I'm not going to state it because I probably would be wrong, but it's quite a bit of time before you're actually able to conduct an audit.
Okay. So yeah, training just like for organic certifier for inspectors.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
You have to go through the training for that specific agency that is conducting, and you could be most likely an inspector for several agencies, but you'd have to be trained for each.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know exactly. I think it's a little different than, you know, with organic certification, it's like being a private contractor, and you can work for you could work for different agencies as long as you met their requirements. For GAP, I think they hire you pretty much for that specific company. So if you went to work for Primus, it probably would be just Primus you would be working for. But each one has their own requirements, so you'd have to do a little research on that.
That's right, and that's right. Good point. That each one has their own requirements. Remember, this isn't like the organic NOP. That there are national guidelines that everybody, all the certifying agencies, have to follow. There's no specific guideline for GAP. It's based on that agency's guidelines, and sometimes they make theirs more stringent to be competitive with the other folks.
Absolutely, Vicki. You are absolutely correct on that.
So somebody was asking about barcode tracking. Is it cost effective for a small farm plan, and how difficult would it be to incorporate into a current farm plan for an organic farmer?
Wow. You know, I really don't know what it would cost, but I know that if you did a, because when I was doing a web search, I come up with several companies that actually do that. But I have no idea what the cost would be. I think that it would definitely simplify the process, because you'd be hitting a barcode and it would head into your computer rather than tracking it, hand tracking it. But cost effective, I don't know what that cost would be, and that would be something that they would need to research. But you should be able to come up with that information pretty easily by doing a web search or a Google search.
Okay, good. So there's a person here who is quite knowledgeable on this topic. He works for one of our educational organizations, and he also wrote an article recently in Farmers Market magazine that really nicely describes about organic, or about farmers going GAP certified. But he shares a point that farmers that are going direct to a farmer's market or have a farm stand, they could keep a log of what crops and lot codes they took to the market that day. So at least you have, you don't know exactly who purchased it, but at least you have the ballpark of which products were taken to the market and which market at that day. So that's a really good point. Thanks so much.
Very good point. Very good point, because I think that it's really, the more information that you can keep track of, the better it's going to be for you in the long run. That is actually a very good point and a very good idea to do that.
Okay, so we have one question here that, and this is where how much detail you include could drive you crazy. Would individual piece labels be required? So I guess, for example, if you have pumpkins or large gourds, would you need individual piece labels? You know, typically a person would only buy 1 pumpkin or 3 pumpkins versus a basket of apples. How do you handle large product items or items that might be labeled?
I have never, I will be honest with you, I have never run into that. But I can see where, I don't know what you would do. Honestly, I don't have an answer for that. I think that if we refer back to the gentleman that's there that you were talking about earlier, I think that if you brought them in bins and you put a code on the bins and you kept track of that, I just don't know how you would do it any different. I really don't, other than to write on the pumpkins. And, you know, a lot of times pumpkins are for, you know, people want to, you know, use those for decoration purposes, and they do not want you writing all over those pumpkins, and they're not going to eat them.
Right, that's right. So just a reminder that, remember, the traceability is a tool for you, and it's a tool to help you better manage your farm for food safety and also for yield, for labor management, for everything. But reminder that you would not be required, even with FSMA came through, once it was enforced, it wouldn't be anything going directly to the consumer would not have to be GAP certified or traced. So if you're thinking that you need to get that in place for that reason, that's not the case at this point. But it's a tool to you, just so you know what's going on your farm. And I think a lot of times farmers get overwhelmed with the bureaucracies and forget about the practicality of this information and how it can enhance the farm and build it so that you can reflect on those records as to what worked and what did not for the next season. All
And
right.
Vicki, are your forms going to be, are they going to be available on that site, or?
Yeah, I have them.
I wasn't sure, so
Yes,
I
they'll
didn't
be
know.
available at michiganorganic.msu.edu, that
Okay.
website that was shared with you, and under farm safety. And or if you can't find something, you can always contact me through my email at sorrone@msu.edu, SORRONE. So here's another question. How important is traceability for the end-of-season crops that are not sold but donated to food pantry or gleaners? That's a good question.
I think it would be just as important to do traceability. You know, what happens if you donate it to a food pantry and everyone becomes sick, and you were one of 4 people that donated that same product to there? You would, and I realize it is the end of the season and stuff, but you still do not want to invite any trouble to your farm. So I would suggest that if you put a traceability system in place, that you keep it throughout the season, even if you are donating it to a food pantry.
Okay, good. Yep,
It's nice to be able to suggest. When you work for the government, you don't make suggestions.
I know, right. So are there any companies that specialize in barcode tracking systems for ag purposes? And I believe there are. Have you come across them in your work, Colleen?
Actually, I have, but you know something? I don't have that readily available. I have seen a lot of barcodes, and actually a few years back, I was in the state of Georgia, and they were just implementing barcodes down in the peanut industry, and got to see the whole system and what they were doing and stuff like that. There's some, they've made some really, major leaps on barcoding. So, but I don't have anybody specific that I could recommend or send them to, because I really don't know.
Okay, all right. And another person asked about, are there grants or funds available to help get the GAP certification? And I know that's always a dilemma if you're already running on a shoestring or trying to get going to take on a new market. Then you have to take on that new market and get GAP certified. How do you afford all that?
Yeah, and I really don't know if there's anything available currently. In fact, probably Vicki, you probably would be the person that would be more apt to be able to answer that. But I think that there's a possibility that if there was a segment of the industry that had been not been as included as some of the others, and I'm not using the right word, that there might be a possibility to write a grant for them in your individual states. And you could probably talk to even your state agencies about that.
I do know that the FSMA is proposed to offer funds to train farmers, small, medium farmers, to become GAP certified and help with what they're calling a cost share. But that'll be contingent on the 2012 Farm Bill, which, if any of you have heard about, we're not sure how big the piggy bank is or how empty the piggy bank is. So, yeah, that's the challenge there. But I would do it by state and encourage nonprofit organizations that work with farmers to set up a fund with that to help, because otherwise, you're right, it's just so costly, especially if you're organic certified already, and then you're on top of that.
It's kind of like it's like having to double pay for something. It really is, because they are already doing so much more, with that documentation, and then to have to take on another level. I would definitely, I agree with Vicki, check your local, your local state agencies and stuff like that, and talk to the people that that are politically connected too. You have a lot of power there that we don't always use, and talk to them about making funds available to the organic farm industry or small farmers so that they can afford to become GAP certified. And and when I mentioned in the slide about checking on prices and stuff like that, that's important. You will find big gaps in the price of certification of what it costs with one agency versus another agency. So definitely shop around too. When you decide that you want to make those, do that. You want to shop around.
Okay. So one last question, and that's asking, are you familiar, Colleen, at all with quick response codes, those squiggle boxes? They call them QR codes.
Not a clue.
Me either, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what they are.
Something else that add a little more to it, the context.
They're called QR what? QR?
Quick response.
Quick response. Okay, I'm going to have to look at that just because I'll be nosy now. I'll wonder what it is, so I'll take a look at that. And
so back on the financial side of things, we were shared that in the Northeast of Iowa, there are different buyers that are offering subsidies to help their growers become GAP certified. And I know here in Michigan we've had buyers provide some training. They've paid for the person to come in and do training for the buyers, for their buyers that they wanted to be GAP certified. They've given them substantial time to do it. Didn't expect them to do it, tell them in February and expect them to have that harvest ready, but they gave them a year to get it done. So if you have especially if you have a relationship with your buyer, but I think communication is so important. Help them to realize what it entails, because sometimes if they're just looking for the marketing aspect of it, they don't realize what it all entails. And it just depends on who's talking to you, what level of in the industry they are. So make sure they understand what it entails, and then ask them if they have other growers that have already completed it, and if you can talk with them. And just like organic certification, man, talk to each other, because that often is the mother. You mentioned as a mother, I don't know, whatever that thing is.
Yeah, the other thing to keep your costs down too, Vicki, is if you and your neighbor are both organic farmers and you want to have GAP certification, I know like with the state agency doing the USDA GAP audits, they would call together. They would call and say they want to have their audit on the same day, because that would save on travel costs, because the inspector would already be in the area.
Yeah, that helps a lot. And the challenge there is that you both need the same GAP type
Correct.
of GAP
it would
audit.
have to be the same,
Yeah.
You betcha. And they're not all the same.
Yep. So, okay. So QRs, we're told, work just like barcodes. They just contain a little more information.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Chris, you're doing this next. Do you know of retailers that are requiring GAP certification to produce? Yeah.
Yes.
So retailers are as well. And yeah, I mean grocery stores. Some of the wouldn't that be what they would be speaking of, like grocery stores that require GAP certification?
Right, because there are grocery stores that buy directly from the farmers, and I think that there probably might be quite a bit of that, with some of the smaller organic farmers too that are delivering directly to the grocery stores. There are retailers that are requiring it. There are wholesalers that are requiring it, and have been, the wholesalers have been requiring it for quite a while. And the bottom line is everybody wants to reduce the risk and for their company. And so if they can get everybody along the way, following these good practices, it is so easy to, have somebody do something wrong on your farm and a mistake happen. It's so easy that, it's one of the big pieces of GAP certification is, to train your employees. It's amazing how many people had to be trained on how to wash their hands.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also amazing to see how many porta potties are now in place on farms that never had porta potties before, because, they need to have a place for the people to use the restroom and to wash their hands.
Yep. Maybe a new job opportunity there.
Yeah, trust me, I don't want to have anything to do with porta potties.
Okay. Well, Vicki and Colleen, with that, we're running out of time. But I'd like to thank you, Colleen, for your excellent presentation, and also thank you, Vicki, for coming on to moderate the questions, and also for offering yourself as a resource. As I mentioned before, if you have additional questions, you can use the Ask an Expert system at extension.org/ask. And this webinar will be posted on the eOrganic website within the next day or two at the link on your screen, extension.org/organic_production under archived webinars, or actually under webinars by eOrganic. It has our full schedule as well as all of our recorded presentations. So thank you so much for joining us today, Colleen, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.